All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this live edition of Testify. And hopefully, this one doesn't get me into too much trouble because I'm talking about why atheists should reconsider Christianity. You might be asking yourself, Eric, these are different. These aren't like your normal videos. Normally, you do these short, kind of short form scripted videos. What's going on? Hey, I'm just trying different things. All right. So I'm still going to probably do the short form videos and just do the normal testify thing, but just kind of giving things a little bit of a try here with some of this long form slides and all kinds of fun stuff. So, with that socially awkward introduction out of the way, let's get even more awkward and talk about why atheists should consider or reconsider Christianity. For a text, I chose Proverbs 18:13. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it is that it is a folly and a shame to him. And I'm sure as we go along, you'll see why I picked that particular text. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, Eric, aren't a lot of atheists like former Christians? And isn't the whole reason that they rejected Christianity in the first place was because they read the Bible, they went to church, they know the ins and outs, and they just know that it's a bunch of bunk? Well, I think in a lot of cases, and if you just watch like deconstruction TikTok for any length of time, you realize that a lot of people who are rejecting Christianity that grew up in church are really rejecting it for some bad reasons, I think, and have made hasty decisions. And this isn't just limited, I think, to like deconstruction TikTok. You see a lot of this with some atheist YouTubers. You see this a lot with just even some biblical critics, which we'll talk about as we go along. And so, again, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you can, click that like button, share this video if you like it, and as we go along, and all of those good YouTubey things. And so, without any further ado, let's talk about why atheists should reconsider Christianity. But first, let's talk about how not to ask atheists to reconsider Christianity. And so, one thing that I think it's a bad idea to do is to go the Pascal's wager route. You might be wrong, and so you probably should live like a Christian, and just in case you are wrong, kind of thing. I know it's a very straw man version of Pascal's wager, but let's talk about it just a little bit here. Basically, Pascal's wager goes something like this: if God exists and I believe in God, I'll go to heaven, which is infinitely good. If God exists and I don't believe in God, I may go to hell, which is infinitely bad. If God does not exist, and whether I believe in God or not, whatever I'd gain or lose would be finite. Accidentally clicked something there. Sorry, guys. Hold on. My computer's acting like really buggy right now. Let's try this again. Oh, boy. All right, let's try. There's Pascal again. All right. So here is basically Pascal's wager in a matrix. And so it's basically you believe in God, infinite reward. God doesn't exist. You just have a finite income. The expected value is infinitely good, right? And then of course the reverse is true if you don't believe in God. So on Pascal's wager, basically, even if the possibility of God existing is really, really low, as long as it's not impossible, believing in God holds immensely valuable potential. If we consider the values in this particular chart and choose the action with the best potential outcome, this whole idea becomes Pascal's wager. And so hopefully this illustrates it for you. You guys, I'm sure, have seen this before, but there's a lot of objections to Pascal's wager. Now, I know there's some diehard Pascal's wager apologists that are out here that might be watching this stream. As you hear my kids screaming in the background there, I apologize for that. But anyways, the Pascal's wager, we're just off to a roaring start here. Bad slides, screaming kids, all that fun stuff. But anyways, it runs into a number of different objections. In this particular objection, I call the Homer Simpson objection, which basically in an episode of The Simpsons, Homer doesn't want to go to church and he's arguing with Marge, and he says, suppose we've chosen the wrong God. Every time we go to church, we're just making him madder and madder. And so the criticism is basically that Pascal's wager is too simple because it doesn't account for many religions. Believing in one might mean missing out on rewards of another. If we consider Christianity and Islam, and things get more complicated because of their different chances and potential outcomes. And so if you just add just one more religion to the probability matrix here, you see that things can get really hinky really fast. And there's also just the other idea that, like, what if there's a non-zero chance that it's atheists who actually go to heaven, and it's the Christians and Muslims and everybody else who goes to hell for some reason? Now, I think that chance is probably slim, but on Pascal's wager, they're saying even if there is a small chance, you ought to wager because of the infinite potentially good outcomes. And so the problem with Pascal's wager, it doesn't appear to favor specific religions. Christianity and Islam share this same expected value. And though the matrix suggests belief in religion is better than atheism, as I already said, a slim chance exists that atheists might reach heaven and theists hell. Without ruling this out, atheism itself isn't riskier. Thus, all options seem equally valuable. And so that's one problem with Pascal's wager. Now, I know, again, there are Pascal's wagers defenders out there. You have like Liz Jackson and Michael Rhoda, who would say, hey, this isn't really all that difficult to respond to. I'm just going over some basic objections. If you want to get more into that, check out their books, papers, videos, and all of those different things that you can find on YouTube. I know Liz Jackson has been on Capturing Christianity many times. But what I'm going to offer, as you guys see down the road, is I think there's an actually far more defensible version of Pascal's wager, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. And so there's also the impossibility objection. This is another objection that people make with Pascal's wager. We can't just form our beliefs simply for our benefits. So if Elon Musk offers you $10 million to believe that Australia doesn't exist, you still would believe that Australia exists. Most philosophers reject doxastic voluntarism, the view that we can directly control our beliefs. And so I can't say, hey, here's a big reward, believe that 1 + 1 + 1 equals 21, to quote the meme there, because that's not how it works, right? Okay, I guess I kind of misquoted the meme. What does he say? What's 9 + 10? 21. Anyways, if you're not a spicy, edgy meme lord, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. And, I'm 44, so how do you do, my fellow kids? I'm just, like I said, keeping it cringy, keeping it awkward, but you guys get the idea, right? You can't just choose to believe things that you know aren't true. And so that's the one objection to Pascal's wager. And then the other is similar. There's the irrationality objection. Forming beliefs through bets on eternity, it goes against evidentialism. And evidentialism suggests that we should base our beliefs on the best available evidence. Our beliefs should be grounded in evidence, not just because we find them helpful. We don't lower the evidential bar, to quote one famous apologist, because we find a particular belief existentially fulfilling. And even if there's like a 1% chance that it's possibly true, we don't want to just believe things just because, so you're saying there's a chance. And so these are some of the main objections to Pascal's wager. Now, again, all of these have been answered, but I'm going to talk to you guys about another wager, which I think makes it more defensible. And I really think this is what some of the Pascal's wager apologists do, is they basically kind of soften it into something like this. This is Butler's wager. This is Joseph Butler, pictured on the screen here, this fine-looking wigged gentleman. And he was writing around the time of the deist controversy, the time of William Paley, the time of David Hume, and, all of those fun guys, where skepticism and deism was just taking over Western Europe. And so Joseph Butler wrote a really good book that I think still is worth reading today, called The Analogy of Religion. And in the second part of the book, he talks about that there are direct and fundamental proofs of Christianity, namely that there are reported miracles and fulfilled prophecies. And there are, besides these, many collateral proofs which may be taken together in a cumulative case, constituting one argument, one long argument. And we owe that argument our most careful attention, weighing up carefully both the positive evidence and any objections that we may encounter, remembering that a mistake on one side may be, in its consequence, much more dangerous than a mistake on the other. And so rather than what Pascal is saying is, hey, just live like a Christian, believe like a Christian, just bet on God, Pascal is saying, no, rather than just like choose to believe it, just investigate it, take your time with it. there's one long argument that's involved with the cumulative case for Christianity. And so if you're wrong, there's definitely some bad payoffs, right? But if it's right, it's definitely worth the time of investigation. And so basically, you have some options here. And here's Butler's wager in another matrix here. You can investigate Christianity carefully. And if it's true, you believe, and there's an infinite reward. If the Christian God does not exist, you don't believe. And what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, you become a really informed critic. You become a very strong counter apologist, if you will, right? But if you neglect to investigate Christianity and you don't believe, there's infinite punishment. And so if Christianity is true, you didn't do your due diligence. And, there you go. And so preaching the turn and burn here, we're having fun now. But if you don't believe and the Christian God does not exist, well, with Butler's wager, the worst thing that could happen is you remain an ignorant critic. Well, I don't think being an ignorant critic is something that people should strive for. And so I think we want to be as well-informed a critic of any particular view that we possibly can. And so I think this takes away all of the basic objections to Pascal's wager, the many gods objection. Well, investigate the religions that present prima facie, and this is important, please hear this, because I know somebody in the comments is going to go, well, Eric, you're just saying investigate any religion. Why don't you investigate Islam? Why don't you investigate some Rastafarianism? I don't know. Maybe Rastafarianism isn't the best example, but you guys get the idea. Investigate any crazy religion. I'm saying investigate the religions that present at least prima facie positive evidence, miracles, and prophecy for the reality. Now, you might say, well, Eric, there's a lot of miracle claims in other religions. Just hang on. We'll get to that. It also takes away the impossibility and irrationality objection. Butler is not asking you to believe in spite of the lack of evidence, but rather he's just asking you to carefully assess the evidence for and against Christianity. So he's not asking you to believe in things that you can't possibly believe in. He's just saying give Christianity a good opportunity, hear the cumulative case. And he's not at all asking you to violate evidentialism. He's saying embrace evidentialism. Butler is dyed-in-the-wool evidentialist, okay? And so now here's the objection. Well, Eric, this is stupid. Because don't you know, David Hume says that there can never be enough testimonial evidence in favor of a miracle. Isn't it more likely that somebody is lying or mistaken that a miracle happened? Isn't a miracle claim by definition the lowest, probable thing that could possibly happen? So let's talk about David Hume for just a little bit. Now, people who really like Pascal are going to get mad that I just kind of went through Pascal rather quickly there. And this isn't meant to be super nuanced. I could do presentations on all of these things in more detail. Just follow this as we go along, because there's like a whole kind of thing that this is building up to. So David Hume basically says that the laws of nature have been established, I should say, through extensive and consistent experience, rendering them as certain as empirical beliefs can be. And so every day we get up, we experience the law of gravity, we experience the laws of nature. We know that they're firm and pretty much for the unalterable. We experience them all the time. We have tons of evidence for them. Human testimony, on the other hand, is a little hinky, right? People aren't consistently truthful. People lie, and people often make mistakes. People think they see Elvis. People think they see Bigfoot. People lie about seeing Elvis and Bigfoot. And so people make mistakes. People aren't truthful. Human testimony isn't as firm as, say, the laws of gravity, right? Even if humans were unfailingly honest and never mistaken, their testimony strength could only match but not surpass the evidence that we possess for the laws of nature. And so this is Hume's argument basically in a nutshell. So we should always prioritize the stronger evidence. Our everyday human experience with the laws of nature pretty much surpasses the laws of human testimony, surpasses what we know about human testimony. And so here's Hume's argument in a meme. We have the laws of nature versus human testimony. Here's the problem. Hume can't meme. Science tells us what nature does when it's left to itself. Great. But nature, or science, on the other hand, doesn't tell us if nature is left to itself. That's scientism. That's importing a philosophical belief about the world. You're just assuming that nature is all that there is. But science itself doesn't tell us if nature is actually left to itself. And so here's a problem with Hume's argument, is that it's actually a false dilemma. Recognizing a miracle would only be possible if there existed a stable and consistent natural order against which a miracle will stand out. Just think about this for just a second. What do we know about, like, say, the Exodus story? Why did Moses say, I must turn aside and see this great sight, when he saw a burning bush that wasn't consumed? He's like, to quote Midwesterners, and I am a Midwesterner, that's different. And so he's like, what's going on? I must see what's happening here. This is something that stands out against the normal laws of nature, right? And so for miracles to serve as signs of the supernatural, they must be infrequent deviations of the usual workings of nature. They have to stand out against the backdrop of the natural order of things. And so Hume is actually presenting the world a false dilemma, and he was actually responded to by William Adams and William Paley and George Campbell and others, who I highly recommend going back. Just look up their names and search miracles or Hume, and you will find things that you could download for free right off of Google Play Books and read. He was actually responded to in his own times. People act like Hume is just like, has this undefeatable argument that no one has answered. No, it's not true. He was actually responded to by his contemporaries. Now you might say, well, Eric, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, or a cree followed by the re sound you usually get when people talk about this particular slogan. Guess what? I don't think that this slogan is necessarily bad. Extraordinary claims requiring much more, indeed, even extraordinary evidence, than ordinary occurrences due to their initial likelihood based on our background information. I think you ought to have good evidence if you're making an extraordinary claim. I think you better have very good evidence. You just have to define, and this is what I would say. Here's something on as far as how to be a better atheist. When you're making this particular claim and you quote this slogan of Carl Sagan's, say what you mean by extraordinary, okay? Because oftentimes when I'm talking with skeptics, when I'm talking with atheists, when you guys say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, you don't fill in what extraordinary is. Do you need to see an arm grow out right in front of your eyes? Do you need to have God himself appear to you? Do you need the doubting Thomas treatment? Do you need to touch the wounds, see the scars and behold, it's me with friends present? Like, what do you mean by extraordinary? And so I think it's a fair thing to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but just define what you mean by extraordinary. I think a defensible version of it is to say even really small probabilities, even if they're really, really tiny, if they're really remote, could potentially be proven true if we have enough high quality testimonial evidence. And so here is Thomas Sherlock, who was writing when Hume was just a wee lad. Sherlock actually predated Hume in this whole deist controversy thing. He says in the book, The Trial of the Eyewitnesses, which again, you could download for free off of Google Play Books. There are so many awesome free books from the deist controversy. It's just crazy. You just get lost forever. But he says, I do not allow that this case and others of like nature, discussing the resurrection, require more evidence to give them credit than ordinary cases do. You may therefore require more evidence in these than in other cases, but it is absurd to say that such cases admit no evidence when the things in question are quite manifestly objects of sense. Okay. And so if you are an atheist and you're at, I don't know, Skepticon or something, and you're standing next to Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra and like 5 of your skeptical buddies, and I'm there, and you are there with, say, a friend who is, I don't know, he's got one arm. And I come up to him and I say, hey, arm, grow in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, that'd be awesome if I could do that. And it grew. And there was just witnesses there. And like Dillahunty's like, oh, yeah, I believe. And Ra's like, oh, yeah, I believe. And they convert and they lose their their YouTube channels and all that other stuff, and whatever positions they have in the atheist online community and activist community or whatever, and all that other stuff, and they testify to it. Okay, well, you may not have camera evidence, you may not have pics, okay, but you have testimonial evidence, and it seems like it's pretty good testimonial evidence. Then I think that would be enough to overcome a low prior probability. And so maybe that's a weird illustration, but Christians have agreed with this particular thing. And here is Charles Babbage, a base Chad mathematician, inventor, mechanical engineer, and philosopher, and father of basically the modern computer, writing, way ahead of time for the modern computer, as you could tell by the picture here. But anyway, he says that if independent witnesses can be found who speak truth more frequently than falsehood, it is always possible to assign a number of independent witnesses the improbability of the falsehood, which concurring testimony shall be greater than the impossibility of the miracle itself. And so basically he's saying that there is enough evidence from testimony that would overturn any kind of a low prior. In other words, if the facts can easily be explained by assuming that a miracle occurred, but without significant difficulty, if we assume that a miracle didn't occur, then the facts strongly support the idea that a miracle occurred. On any plausible background assumptions, if Jesus died and physically rose, then the likelihood of theism is nearly 1. That's why we're talking about resurrection. That's why I'm jumping right into resurrection. I'm not talking about arguments for the existence of God and why you should reconsider theism or anything else like that. What I am saying is that if there's more evidence in favor of the miracle and the explanations against it actually being a miracle are more ad hoc, lack explanatory value and scope, and all of that, kind of stuff is just like the explanation becomes more contrived than the simple explanation, then that is evidence for a miracle. So Hume was probably wrong. Any ground for assigning low initial probability to the claim that a miracle has happened cannot be greater than the rational prejudice against the conjunction of two claims. One, that God possibly exists, so that atheism is possibly false, there possibly is a God, and if it's possibly true that God has destined humans for a future state of existence. If God wants to tell people about a very important message, I don't know really what other way that he can do it other than a miracle. And so if these two claims are possibly true, miracles aren't improbable. They are actually like inevitable at some point in history that somebody is going to witness them. And so if these two things are possibly true, then I'm sorry, Hume is wrong. There can be enough evidence to overcome. You have to have a way of knowing that you're wrong. Okay. This is a question that I like to ask skeptics all the time. If you're going to say that Hume is right, well, how can you ever know that you're wrong? How could you know that a miracle happened other than you yourself personally witnessing it, experiencing it? And so that's why we want to be able to dig into the history of these things. But how do we kick these things off? There are tons of different religions that make a barrage of miracle claims. Is there any way to rely on miracles as proof for a specific faith? So, right. There are miracle claims in Islam, right? There are miracle claims in all kinds of religions. You got Satya Sai Baba, you got Indian gurus, you have, all kinds of Roman emperors supposedly performing miracles at certain points in history and all these other stuff. Where do we even begin, right? This is kind of Hume's other argument in the second part of his essay. And so this is where we want to enter the doubts filter. So what if I told you that there was a religiously neutral criteria that we could use and shave things away so we don't have to waste our time herring after every miracle claim that's out there, right? Because we're going to be doing this for the rest of our lives, and that's not a good use of your time, right? And so the doubts filter, we're going to talk about all of these. There's dissident events, opinions already established. I'm getting this from Tim McGrew. Tim McGrew is a philosophy instructor, and philosophy instructors love their acronyms, apparently. The U is uncertain and undetailed events. We also have belated reports, trivial events, and self-serving events. So we're going to talk about all of these in turn. And so one of the things, if you guys remember my conversation with Derek Lambert of the Myth Vision podcast, is he was just like, well, you guys just think that Jesus is special. You're special pleading. You're making an exception for the guy that you really like, but there are all these other miracles. There are all these other myths. There are these other legends that you don't believe either. So why are you, and again, even historical figures that we know existed that said they perform miracles, why are you making a special exception for Jesus? You hear this all the time. And so let's talk about some of the criteria. Now, I'm not saying that for a miracle claim, I'm saying you don't, if a miracle happened and it doesn't pass all of these criteria, that's possible. I'm just talking about laying down some criteria for how we can know what to actually spend time. I'm not saying that if something doesn't pass the criteria, that miracle didn't happen and in the past, but I'm saying that let's have an evidential filter to not waste our time. And so with enough of that rambling out of the way, distance, when the first port is only made at a great distance of the event. So an example of that, all the miracles attributed to Apollonius of Tyana were initially described as occurring hundreds of miles away from where his biographer Philostratus was writing. And so for those of you who don't know, Apollonius, Bart Ehrman really likes to use this example a lot. He lived around the same time of Jesus. I believe he lived from 25 to 100 AD. He was a Greek miracle worker, philosopher, traveled all over the world, India, all these different places, allegedly performing miracles and exorcisms and all these different things. Well, Philostratus was writing in Greece. Apollonius is doing these things hundreds of miles away. And so right there off the bat is a bit of a problem, okay? It's kind of like that guy that you knew in high school or college who's like, hey, I have this really amazing, smoking hot supermodel girlfriend, and he shows you a picture of a glamour shot as evidence. And then when you're like, oh, really? Wow, when do we get to meet her? Well, she lives in Canada. It's like, okay, buddy, sure. So how about opinions already established, right? When miracles confirm or affirm established opinions and prejudices, we have some reasons to be skeptical. Here's another one that Bart Ehrman likes to use a lot. He did this in his debate with Justin Bass. He used the example of Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidic Judaism and was renowned for his mystical powers. The problem with the stories of Baal Shem Tov is that the legends about him arose within the community itself without any adverse consequences for putting them forward or any apparent critical examination. And so using the Baal Shem Tov as saying, hey, why aren't you investigating him? I don't think that really works because this is something that sprung up where people already believed in Baal Shem Tov, okay? Many of the reported Marian apparitions put forward happen in countries with a very high Catholic or maybe Orthodox population. And so now I'm not saying all the Marian apparitions are automatically false because of this or that they didn't happen. I'm just saying that one could decline to investigate some of the Marian apparitions when they're put forward in countries where there's just already a high Catholic population. They just affirm opinions that are already established, and there's no adverse consequences for putting them forward. And in some cases, and not all cases certainly, are they not critically examined. Now, I think some of the apparitions, at least according to the Catholic Church, they'll dispute that and say, no, we do critically examine and approve certain ones that are worthy of belief only after critical examination, but we don't have to get in the weeds with that here. So what about uncertain and undetailed events? Well, granting that the event really happened, if it can be explained without implausibility that it was a natural event, we have reasons to be skeptical. Undetailed events could also be included. We don't have, if we don't have the details about what the supposed miracle was like, then we have reason to be skeptical. And so an example of an uncertain miraculous report, and this is a Christian miracle report, is the Thundering Legion, which is a legendary event where Roman soldiers prayed for water during a campaign that included many Christian soldiers. A sudden rainstorm, sometimes with thunder and lightning, provided the water they needed, while it also terrified their enemies and scared them away. It's seen as a Christian example of divine intervention, but hey, let's just be honest, rain happens. You could probably also include like somebody like Honi the circle drawer, which a lot of biblical critics like to throw in there as an example of kind of a contemporary miracle wonder worker to Jesus. Well, I don't think that this particular miracle warrants serious investigation, okay? Now let's talk about undetailed events. Again, if you watch the debate with Bart Ehrman and Justin Bass, one of the things that he brought up was Joseph Smith and the angel Moroni and the three witnesses who actually signed affidavits, okay, that they saw the angel Moroni and the golden plates. The problem with these affidavits is they don't offer any specific details regarding the day, the time, the location, or other circumstances of the event. The absence of this information raises questions, particularly considering that the document is intended to be a signed statement validating their encounter. And so, what was the appearance of the angel Moroni like? Did they eat with him? Did they touch him? What time of day was it? Where were they? Well, I mean, I think there's like some part about some of the location, generally speaking, but we don't have a whole lot of specifics. There's a whole lot more that we want to know. And so one could decline to investigate. Here's another one that Bart Ehrman used in the same debate with Justin Bass. He said Lucian of Samosata tells the story of Peregrinus Proteus, a philosopher who purportedly immolated himself at the Olympic Games, and witnesses claim to have seen a phoenix rising from the ashes the next day. But this account is very fuzzy and it's open to interpretation. Okay. And so I don't think this is a very good, comparison in the case where Bart Ehrman is concerned with the resurrection of Jesus, where he's saying, touch me, handle me, right? He's eating broiled fish with them and they know him and spent 3 years with him. And he spent a period of 40 days with them, reportedly. Okay. So what about belated reports? When the first event or first report of a said miracle comes along after the event, we have some serious reasons to be skeptical. Examples: the ascension of Romulus was first reported by Tacitus 800 years after the alleged event. Okay, skeptics, stop throwing Romulus out there. I think this one came up. Derek, I love you. You remember our conversation? This came up with my conversation with Derek of the Myth Vision podcast. He's probably not watching, but just in case you are, don't use Romulus. Like, the first report was Tacitus. It was 800 years after the event. Like, no, this is a belated report. Apollonius, going back to our buddy Apollonius. Well, Philostratus was writing 100 years after he was dead. These are when the first reports happened, okay? When did, at least reportedly, the first reports of Christianity start to get preached on the streets? In Jerusalem, 40 days after Jesus' crucifixion. And so there's a whole lot of difference in terms of where the event was reported. Was it with opinions that were already established? No, it was in the context of Judaism, right? If you're going to go start a miracle cult, you go down to Florida, right? You do the Todd Bentley routine, okay? You don't go, Todd Bentley can't pull his same tricks in Mecca. He would be dead before he hit baggage claim, okay? And so, yeah, so these are some common sense criteria. Here's another example. St. Nicholas, supposedly he resurrected some children from the dead. Well, the first report of St. Nicholas resurrecting some children from the dead was during the medieval period. Well, St. Nick died in 343 AD. So big problem there. Trivial events. And just got two more here. And so these would be reports of miracles that are unconnected to any significant purpose. As Horace said, let a god not intervene unless it's not worthy of a god's untying. Examples: Pine Creek's flying man. Okay, so Pine Creek loves this thought experiment. And so, hey, my cousin Myron or my uncle Myron or whatever, it's always Myron, saw, or his own uncle, I don't know, flying over the Grand Canyon. Would you believe him? Well, what if there was 500 witnesses that saw my Uncle Myron flying over the Grand Canyon, right? Would you believe? Well, again, this flying man, what does it signify? What is the significant purpose? Maybe, Doug, that's something, if you're watching, you could add, to your thought experiment, okay? But it's unconnected to any sort of significant purpose. And so it just doesn't seem to be worth investigating. You also have Jonathan Pierce, who me and Caleb Jackson talked to again on the Myth Vision podcast on the subject of miracles. He talks about his dog who has a fire-breathing dragon on its shoulder and a skunk that dances with a live unicorn. Okay, what exactly is that connected to? What significant purpose does that serve? Well, let's just talk about a real-life example. You have Sai Baba. This is Sam Harris's favorite guy, who, died while some of us were still alive. He's supposedly doing these miracles on camera, and if you've ever seen them, they're pretty pretty whack. I mean, it looks like he's just basically pulling quarters from behind people's ears almost, twisting his arm around. All of a sudden, ooh, look, it's a clock. It's a watch. Okay. What is a clock and a watch that you're giving me? Like, what is that connected to? What significant purpose does that serve? This is just trivial, right? It's not connected to any deeper thing in my life, right? Or what about self-serving miracles? And this is the last one of the criteria. When a reported miracle is clearly motivated by human desires such as sex, political power, greed, or craving for fame, there's substantial reason to question the legitimacy, I'm going to be able to get this out here, of such a miracle claim. And so again, Satya Sai Baba, he faced accusations of sexual abuse and money laundering. After he died, people went in his room, they found $4 million worth of gold, silver, and cash stashed. Okay. Something a little weird is happening here. Or what about Joseph Smith? He had aspirations to become the president of the United States. He entered into marriage with over 40 different women. Some of those women are underage, right? These instances raise suspicions about the authenticity of their purported revelations. And so there's some problems there, all right? And so these, again, are all the things that you can use to weed out whatever's left on the table. Let's look at it, right? I don't care what religion it is. Who cares? Let's investigate it if it passes those. Well, what about some positive criteria? What if a reported miracle passes the doubts test? Awesome. Many miracles claims stumble on one or two or more of these doubts. They could be true, but it's reasonable to skip checking them out. However, if they do, we can investigate those that meet certain positive criteria. So let's talk about some positive criteria real quick. Certain types of positive evidence can make the case stronger. An event could not meet all of these following criteria and still be true, but if it does, that's at least a strong argument in its favor that, again, warrants closer investigation. So how about public? Is the miracle public? Is it not restricted to one witness? Okay. So Muhammad's night journey from, I think it was Mecca to Jerusalem or Mecca to Medina, I don't know. One of you people who are knowledgeable about Islam can fill me in the chat. But his night journey, I guess he rode a special horse, met prophets, and just made the supernaturally quick journey. Well, he was the only person who witnessed it, okay? That's not a public miracle, whereas the resurrection is in front of, at least reportedly, many people, right? Are there any acts or monuments set up to commemorate the event? Is the event something that our outward senses could judge? So when Martin Harris, one of the people who said he saw the golden plates, says, yeah, I saw them through my spiritual eye. Were they an object of sense or weren't they? Right? What's going on here? It raises suspicion. So the other thing is time, right? Was there some sort of act or memorial that was instituted from the time that the event occurred? If something has all four of these marks, again, that's a strong argument for its favor. Here's one just from secular history. This is not a miracle claim. America's independence from the British. Obviously, it was an experience of the senses. It was a public event. Independence Day was instituted on July 4th in 1777. We obviously can be certain that it happened, right? Does Jesus' resurrection pass the test? Well, Jesus reportedly appeared to people after he came back to life, talked with them, shares meals with them, even let people touch him. His resurrection was something that they could experience. And according to the book of Acts, this is something that happened over a period of 40 days. Jesus reportedly appeared to many people, often in groups. This included the 11 disciples and reportedly a gathering of over 500 people at once. His resurrection was a public event. Okay. Now, as far as memorials, the church itself is a public reminder of his resurrection, and the shift from worshiping on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, which was a huge shift considering how after the exile, the Jews were fanatical about keeping the Sabbath. And so all of a sudden now you have Jewish believers and Gentile believers worshiping on the first day of the week. We see this in Acts 20, verse 7, talks about them breaking bread on the first day of the week. We hear Paul in 1 Corinthians 16 saying, on the first day of the week, when you guys meet, lay aside an offering for the poor saints in Jerusalem. And then we also see this in Revelation, where he talks about, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Okay, and so all of these things kind of pile up, and then we see Justin Martyr talking about the Christians meeting on the first day of the week, and all kinds of other church fathers. And so this was something that happened very early on. And so what exactly explains this? So both the church's establishment and the shift to Sunday worship happened right after the story of the resurrection was told. They were put in the right place when the event occurred. Now, I'm not saying any of this proves the resurrection, okay? So don't misunderstand me. But what I am saying is that the first 2 points make sure that the original witnesses probably weren't fooled because it happened in public, visible, and audible to all, if these reports are actually true and go back to the eyewitnesses. And the last 2 points make sure that the event wasn't made up way later after the supposed original eyewitnesses were no longer around. And so it passes the test. Now you might be saying, Eric, shut up. You're just talking about what a book says. I don't want to hear about what a book says, okay? Biblical scholars have concluded that the Gospels are mostly bunk, okay? So I'm not making a for the Bible tells me so argument. What I'm saying is, do the Gospels actually go back to what the original eyewitnesses claimed? And if that's true, then it would be very difficult to say that they were mistaken considering the details that they report. It would also be difficult to say that they're lying because they're making these claims in the face of a hostile audience, right? But what if these details were just embellished? What if they were just added later? Isn't that what biblical scholars have concluded? Well, about those biblical scholars, here's Bart Ehrman. Now you would say, well, Eric, come on. If anybody's taken Butler's wager, it's got to be Bart Ehrman. He's a former fundamentalist Christian. He was a Baptist minister. He went to Princeton Theological Seminary. He studied under Bruce Metzger. And he's a scholar, and he concluded that most of this stuff is bunk. Okay. But should we trust the biblical scholars? Let's take a look at examples of some claims of Bart's here. So this is from his book, Jesus Interrupted. And he says in John's gospel, Jesus performs his first miracle in chapter 2 when he turns the water into wine, a favorite miracle story on college campuses. Ha, ha, ha. We are all laughing. No, I'm just kidding. That's actually a pretty good joke, Bart. And we're told that this was the first sign that Jesus did, John 2:11. Later in that chapter, we're told that Jesus did many signs in Jerusalem, John 2:23. And then in chapter 4, he heals the son of a centurion, and the author says, this was the second sign that Jesus did. Huh? One sign, many signs, and then the second sign? And so here, John can't be an eyewitness because he's an idiot. He can't even keep up with his own story, okay? Well, this is what I would say, what I would call artificial disharmonization. These biblical scholars, they're like, don't harmonize events in the Gospels. You're creating your own gospel. But then they disharmonize the Gospels by just putting things in the story and creating contradictions where there are none, okay? So in John 2:11, let's look at the text for ourselves. It says, the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee. John 2:23, now when Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. And then John 4:54, this was the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. And so the bold text that I'm putting here are the parts of the passage that Bart happened to omit for some reason. Bart, what are you doing here? John 2:11 and 4:54 are talking about the first and second signs that Jesus did while he was in Galilee, okay? These signs alluded to in John 2:23 were not in Galilee. They were in Jerusalem. So he's talking about what's going on in Galilee as far as the second sign. So Bart, baby, what is you doing? Like, this is bad, okay? Or what about this one? Every skeptic loves the double donkey. You see atheist YouTubers do it. They're getting a lot of it, maybe from Bart Ehrman, maybe from other critics. So in Matthew, this is Bart Ehrman again, I'm quoting him. Jesus' disciples procure 2 animals for him, a donkey and a colt, and they spread their garments over the 2 of them. And Jesus rode into town straddling them both. It's an odd image, but Matthew made Jesus fulfill the prophecy of Scripture quite literally. So ha, ha, ha. Jesus, the rodeo clown. Matthew can't be an eyewitness because he can't even read parallelism and understand Zechariah's prophecy correctly. He's just a doofus. But what exactly is the antecedent of them? Well, they brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks. This is the actual verse. And he sat on them. This is again Matthew 21:7. Well, Matthew and a number of Greek scholars like John A.T. Robinson, um, who's not necessarily an Orthodox Christian, he says that Matthew likely refers to the cloaks as the place where Jesus sat, not both the donkey and the colt. This makes sense because the colt, never ridden or sat upon before, as Mark and Luke tell us, would naturally depend on its mother, especially in the face of a big crowd, as Matthew implies. And so, why is Bart going out of his way to discredit the gospel writers and make them look stupid when there's like some really simple explanations of these? And yet, we get this weird artificial disharmonization or just creating contradictions or absurdities where there really are none if we just use a little common sense. There's also examples of Bart Ehrman cherry picking the Gospels to create legendary development. And so here again is Bart. He says, referring to Jesus' crucifixion in the book of Mark, he says, Jesus is silent the entire time as if in shock until his cry at the end, echoing Psalm 22. Mark is trying to say something about this betrayal. He doesn't want his readers to take solace in the fact that God was really there providing Jesus with physical comfort. No, he dies in agony and sure of the reason he must die. But in Luke's account, Jesus is not at all confused about what's happening to him or why. He's completely calm and in control of the situation. He knows what's about to occur. He knows what will happen afterward. This is a far cry from the Jesus Mark who felt forsaken to the end. Is this really true? Or is Bart just trying to say, well, Mark is first, Luke comes later, and so let's create some development, and say that the story just grew in the telling? Well, the problem here is that Jesus obviously predicts his death and resurrection repeatedly in Mark. Just read Mark 8:31, 9:31, Mark 10:32 through 34, verse 45, and the parable of the tenants in Mark 12. He knows he's going to die. Okay, he knows what's coming, all right? And it's only in John, which is actually the latest and allegedly the most developed gospel of the four, that records Jesus admitting physical pain. He says that he thirsts on the cross. This contradicts Ehrman's thesis of Jesus being unsure about death's reason or why he died in the aftermath, or the alleged development theory. And Jesus' cry in Mark 15:34 also echoes Psalm 22:1, implying fulfillment. And if you read the entire psalm, and New Testament scholar Brant Petra says that, and this is in the Mishnah, where one could quote the first verse of a psalm and invoke the entire psalm. Well, what does the end of Psalm 22 talk about? All of the nations are going to worship the God of Israel because of the psalmist's deliverance from death. He was laid down in the dust of death, that they damaged his hands, they damaged his feet, that he's surrounded by his enemies, that it looks, if anything, that he gave out his last breath, that all his bones are out of joint. But then at the end of the psalm, all the nations are worshiping God because of his deliverance. And so, who else does that seem to describe but Jesus here? And so this is just cherry picking, right? This is just taking things, trying to put them together in order to support some sort of development hypothesis that the tale grew in the telling. And again, the most allegedly developed gospel has Jesus saying, I thirst, which is very, very, very human, okay? And it's not just limited to Bart here. Here's Paula Fredrickson, PhD. She teaches at Boston University, teaching New Testament. She suggests that the author of Acts might not be familiar with the real Paul. This is because Paul leaves out important details about his conversion and training when he's talking about his past to the Philippians. So if you've ever read the book of Philippians, chapter 3, he talks about, I was a Hebrew of Hebrew. I was circumcised on the 8th day. I was of the tribe of Benjamin. I kept the law. I was a Pharisee. I was zealous. But I consider all those things to be dung compared to knowing Christ. And she's like, well, why doesn't he mention his training under Gamaliel? Or why doesn't he talk about, hey, I was there when Stephen was stoned to death, and I was guilty. I approved of his death. Why doesn't he ever talk about that in any of his letters, let alone Philippians chapter 3 when he's being biographical? Well, holy argument from silence, Batman. Paul doesn't tell us what he did. He said that he worked, but he never tells us what he did. Acts is where it says that he made tents, okay? Paul doesn't talk about a lot of different things about himself. But we don't conclude that, like, from that, make these big sweeping conclusions. And Paul doesn't mention Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River. Okay. Well, I'm sure Paula Friedrichsen would say that Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. Paul doesn't mention his reputation, Jesus' reputation as an exorcist or a miracle worker. He talks about he works miracles, but he never mentions Jesus' miracles. Well, I think Paula Friedrichsen would acknowledge that at least Jesus had a reputation for being those things, whether she thinks he was those things or not. Paul doesn't mention any of Jesus's parables. He doesn't mention his betrayal by Judas. He never even mentions Judas. He doesn't mention his conflicts with the Pharisees, or that he died in Jerusalem, or that it was under Pilate that he died, unless you're counting 1 Timothy, which we all know that Paula Friedrichsen would not. And so I don't think she would be doubtful about most or any of these historical facts concerning Jesus. This is just a huge argument from silence and a very bad habit of New Testament critics. Go back, watch my video with Lydia McGrew about bad habits of New Testament scholars. But my point here is that if famous ex-Christian turned New Testament skeptical biblical critics can get things this wrong, what else, in the case of like Bart Ehrman, might they have missed? Okay. And so what you can't do as a skeptic is, let's just do this whole trial by proxy. I'm going to trust the New Testament scholars because they're the experts, and I'm going to trust the skeptical ones because they're probably the ones who are really looking at this the most critically. They're not bringing any sort of religious pretext to the text. Well, is that true? Really? Is that true? Is that true? I mean, Bart Ehrman basically, again, in his debate with Justin Bass on the Unbelievable podcast, was basically like, I don't think God can break the laws of nature any more than he could break the laws of math. Okay. He's like, no, sorry, miracles aren't even a thing. Don't you think that's going to kind of color a little bit on how he looks at the text? So everybody's bringing some sort of bias to the text. We want to mitigate bias as much as we can, but these examples that I'm showing you, and I could bring up dozens and dozens of other examples of just bad scholarly habits from New Testament critics. And so you can't just do the trial by proxy and say they've decided it, and so therefore I don't need to investigate. No, do the homework for yourself, right? And so what do you have to lose, right? At worst, and this is the moral of the story, this is how I'm trying to help you guys become better atheists, is, hey, like, be able to steel man an argument for Christianity and become familiar with the evidence enough that you could present at least the strongest positive case. Even if you don't even personally believe that the case is all that strong, you should be able to be a good, like, for a lack of better terms, devil's advocate for Christianity, and then, have at it. Okay. But again, a lot of times the skeptics, they're not taking Butler's wager. They haven't done these things. They're just like, well, biblical scholars and Hume. And so I don't have to really look into this. No, let's look into this, because again, there could be a lot at stake in this, and you don't want to miss out on an eternity with God and a fulfilling life as a Christian. Okay. So you have a lot to lose. You have nothing to gain. The worst thing that you could gain is you could be a really, really, really good counter apologist. And I'm looking for really, really good counter apologists. I want to see better critics. There are some that exist. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. And there are also inarticulate Christians who can't make a good argument for Christianity and couldn't make a good argument for atheism. So the shoe does fit on the other side of things. I'm not saying just study one thing and that's it. Like, I think a good Christian apologist ought to be able to really put the fear of God, for a lack of better terms, in some inarticulate Christians, and should be able to really kind of freak them out a little bit. Okay. And so this does go both ways. So don't misunderstand me. Like, I think a good Christian apologist is going to read J.L. Mackie, is going to read Graham Oppie, is going to read Bart Ehrman, is going to read Dale Allison. I know Dale is a Christian, but he doesn't think that you can conclude that the resurrection can be determined just by historical evidence alone. And he offers a lot of good criticisms. You're going to read the best critics. Okay. So you don't have anything to lose. If you want to explore, here are some things that I recommend. If you are a critic of Christianity and you haven't read The Resurrection of God Incarnate by Richard Swinburne, I would recommend that you do it. Okay. He talks a lot about the prior probability that if it's even moderately probable that God exists, and there are reasons why God would want to become incarnate and share our suffering. And then he talks about the posterior evidence for the resurrection. Richard Swinburne is known to be one of the most premier Christian philosophers in all the world. He's respected by atheists and Christians alike. The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. Again, another book that I would recommend that you grapple with in terms of, why the resurrection was something that wasn't really expected and kind of was unprecedented. And then he talks about some of the evidence for it. I would recommend 75 pages, The Argument for Miracles by Tim and Lydia McGrew. It's part of the Blackwell Companion of Natural Theology. You can go to Lydia's website and actually download a copy of it for free. And then I would recommend afterwards, they assume that the Gospels go back to what the original eyewitnesses claim in the article, but they say that they're putting that out there up front. Well, ever since then, Lydia has been arguing for the reliability of the Gospels and them going back to what the original eyewitnesses said. And so you can check out her book, Testimonies to the Truth, that is going to give you the easiest, reader-friendly version of her arguments for the positive case of the reliability of the Gospels. And then be sure to check out her book, Eye of the Beholder, on the Gospel of John. Be sure to check out Hidden in Plain View on the argument from undesigned coincidences. For those of you who don't know, Lydia McGrew is a published analytic philosopher with her husband, Tim. And so definitely check that out. Check out all of her books. She's been on the show many, many times. A View of the Evidences of Christianity, William Paley. You might be like, Eric, that's from like the 1700s. Yeah, I know. But he replies to Hume, and he does give a lot of positive evidences for the martyrdom of the early Christians, as well as, or at least the willingness to endure labors, dangers, and sufferings. He talks about a lot of the positive evidence for the genuineness of the Gospels and who wrote them, and just a lot of different things that are still hundreds of years later worth your time. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's been refuted. Okay. The Book of Acts in the Setting of Hellenistic History by Colin J. Hemmer is another book that is definitely highly recommended. And then again, less friendly to the Christian verdict. I am not saying don't listen to just one side. Okay. I am saying check out The Resurrection of Jesus, Apologetics, Polemics, and History by Dale Allison. Check out How Jesus Became God by Bart Ehrman, and really any of Bart Ehrman's books as far as related to the Gospels, I think are worth reading. I think he's a pretty good interlocutor in some ways. I think that he can be, I don't know, a little sketchy in other ways. And I'm not trying to impugn motives. I just don't know, but I find a lot of his arguments to be weak, but it's worth looking into. It's worth checking out. And so those are some resources that will get you kind of going. And if you can do these things, again, what do you have to lose? The worst thing that could happen is you become a good faith interlocutor who's not just saying, hey, what's more likely that, somebody's lying or mistaken or a miracle happened? Okay, sorry, that argument has already been manhandled by even agnostic philosophers like John Ehrman. And it's not just going, well, hey, my favorite biblical scholars say that this is all bunk, and so I don't have to listen to you. No, just do the homework for yourself. And so I thank you guys so much for watching. And if you guys have questions, the reason why I'm doing these lives, I would love to engage. And so if you guys have questions, put in Q:, and I will try and get to your questions if you have any. And if not, we'll just sign off, and that'll be that. I hope you guys found this stuff helpful. If you did, like it, do all the things, give me a comment, let me know. Because again, I'm just trying something a little different here. And so let me know what you guys think. I'll give you guys a minute here. I guess I could have warned you ahead of time. I'm sorry, I'm still new to the whole stream thing. Can I go live with Pine Creek? I've been willing to talk to Doug one-on-one. I mean, he's just going to do the flying man. We know it. And so like, that's his shtick, or poof or drown and all that other stuff. So, I mean, maybe sometime I'd be willing to. Probably not going to happen today. I have 5 kids and a business, and this is my hour or two to set aside to this. And so, no, I'm not opposed to talking to Doug. I have been in the past. I've been irritated with Doug before because Doug can be a little trollish, just being honest. But hey, I honestly don't even care. In a lot of ways, I find the guy to be funny. I find the guy to be amusing. I agree with a lot of his political takes. And Doug's a funny guy. So, but yeah, sure, Doug. Go to my about page, send me an email, and I'm not entirely opposed. So, any other questions? Well, I'd be doing more videos defending the Old Testament in the future. Thank you, Lego David, for the question. Yeah, I've been thinking about something defending the Exodus. It's not going to be anything different than what inspiring philosophy has already gone into a lot of depth there. So I'm not going to, well, it would be different. I'm not going to try and redo the wheel, is what I'm trying to say. I would probably talk about it from more of a almost a philosophical point of view, I guess, of like more like a kind of an argument form, using Charles Leslie's work, back again, an older apologist, where he talks about the four marks that I already talked about with the past, how the Exodus actually passes that. Plus, we do have a lot of good evidence from people like Kenneth Kitchen and Joseph Hoffmeyer and different people like that. And so I would like to incorporate that as well. And so when will I have that? I don't know. But it's something that I'm studying and interested in. And when I feel prepared enough to talk about it intelligently, I'll do it. If I feel like the evidence isn't all that great, then I won't talk about it. I'm not expecting it to be that way. Like I said, I find a lot of what IP has talked about to be pretty persuasive, very, very interesting. But yeah, so that answers that question. Let's see what else we got here. What is my favorite Bible book from the Old Testament? Again, Lego David, thank you for the question. I would have to say probably just the Psalms. I mean, I think every Christian should read through the Psalms like once a month or every 60 days. No, I'm not Anglican, but Anglicans, that's like one of the coolest things that I think you guys do is reading through the Psalms every month or every 60 days. And so I think it is amazing expressions of prayer. And there's just a lot of really, I don't know, just edifying things in there. And there are things in there that raise questions. I'm sure some skeptic is like, what about the babies being dashed on rocks thing? I actually plan on doing a video about that in the future. And so I just find the book of Psalms to just be really, really good. I'm sure that's a pretty popular answer there. It's kind of like saying, well, the Gospel of John is my favorite gospel, but unoriginal answer there, but there you go. Let's see. All right. Matthew Nitt says, for you, how do you get from thinking there is good evidence for Jesus' resurrection and eyewitness recording his statements to hell existing and being expected from a good and just God? And so, well, Jesus, first of all, he talks about hell. He teaches on hell. And so I would say that if there's good evidence for the resurrection, you don't just automatically go, well, no, that can't be true because hell is just a nasty thing that I don't want to believe in. And, a good God couldn't send somebody there. Well, how do you know that you're right about that? How do you know what hell is like? Is it possible that hell is just experiencing the presence of God and you're in a state where you don't like God and like his own presence is tormenting to you? I know there's a lot of Eastern Orthodox believers who believe something like that, and still regard that the Bible is completely inspired, inerrant word of God. And so there are different ways of looking at hell. I know C.S. Lewis talks about hell being locked, the gates being locked on the inside. And it's a place where people who don't want to be with God can be separated with him. If you've ever read The Great Divorce, you kind of get a psychology of what's possible. I mean, obviously it's a fictional book from C.S. Lewis, but you could get into a mentality of what people in hell might be thinking and how they continue to talk themselves out of belief in God or wanting to trust God or holding to he's good or feeling like God has been unjust to them in some way or somebody else has been unjust to them in some way and they're just holding on to that. And so, you know, I would say if there's good evidence that the resurrection happened, then we should accept what Jesus taught. And then maybe your view of hell or of justice um, is the what actually needs tweaking and not the other way around. Now, I'm sure that's not a real popular answer. And I don't expect a lot of people to like initially be like, oh yeah, that's really emotionally satisfying to me. Like, no, I understand. Like, I don't think anybody's excited about the idea of eternal conscious torment, but I don't think hell is like Dante's Inferno necessarily either, where it's like, I don't know, there's, demons poking you with pitchforks the whole time and different things like that either. And so I would read like The Great Divorce if you want to get into like some of the psychology of what it could be like with people in hell. I mean, even with the rich man and Lazarus, like what did the rich man say? He said, send Lazarus um, to relieve me. He was basically still trying to boss him around. And I know it's a parable or whatever, but the point was is Jesus portrayed hell as people that are there who don't necessarily want to leave. He's like, he didn't act like he wanted to leave. He just wanted a little relief, and he still wanted to boss around a poor person that he ignored and basically abused for his entire life. And the guy apparently seemed to not necessarily want to be there. He wanted to be relieved, but it didn't seem like he was trying to get out and be with God either. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense there. And so let's go into questions here. Any more? Thank you guys for putting up with my awkwardness. Like I said, this is kind of a new thing here. Ooh, this is a good one. The mighty Sarlacc. How do you deal with verses like Numbers 31:17 through 18? That is a nasty passage. Let's just admit it. Nasty passage. And so let's read it. Let's actually pull it up here. So give me just a second. This is a very good question. So Numbers. Now you might be like, Eric, you can't just call a biblical passage nasty. Aren't you inerrantist, diehard fundamentalist Christian? But let's just read it now. Therefore, kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman who has known a man intimately, but keep alive for yourselves the young girls who have not known a man intimately. So basically, like, keep the virgins for yourself, kill the ones that have had sex, and kill the husbands, kill everybody, keep the women. Yeah, that's a pretty troubling passage of scripture. And so I would say when I see nasty things that are in the Old Testament, I just go, okay, yeah, yep, sure, that's what was written down. Jesus dealt with a nasty passage of scripture in Deuteronomy chapter 24, where a woman couldn't divorce a man, but a man could divorce a woman, apparently for any reason that he wanted to. Is the way that they were arguing the passage should be interpreted. And the disciples were crazy enough to think, well, man, what's wrong with that passage? Like, isn't that okay? If that's the case, nobody should ever be able to get married. Like, you should be able to have no fault divorce and be married if you want to. And the woman is just basically kind of stuck without rights. And Jesus said, hey, guys, in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't like this. He created a male and female. Okay. And like, no, this isn't the way that it's supposed to be. And Moses wrote this, permitting it because of the hardness of your own heart. Now, why would God even allow him to permit that? Like, again, that still raises some questions that personally, I don't actually have all the answers for. But Jesus is talking about there's hardness of heart. That is why Moses is writing some of these things. And Jesus is saying, hey, let's go back to the way that things actually were intended to be originally. And that's why Jesus is coming around and saying, hey, the law said this, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, which is really kind of an unspoken part. He's not actually quoting a verse, but you see like passages in the Psalms that express hatred towards his enemy. And Jesus is like, no, love them too. Okay. Pray for them. If they tell you to walk a mile, if a Roman soldier tells you to walk a mile carrying his bags, go too. Okay. So he's taking the law and he's saying, no, it's not perfect. And this is the order. This is the standard. And so those are some things that you want to take into consideration. There is a really good episode of the Bible Project with Tim Mackey on this. I don't remember the name of the exact episode, but if you go back in their podcast, there's an episode that you can listen to for more on that kind of particular argument. And so I just think it's okay to admit, like, there's some stuff that's commanded in the Old Testament that we see Jesus flatly saying, no, creational order, hardness of heart, this is the way that I'm saying it is now. So let's go with Jesus. He's the express image of God's person, and he's the exact representation of God. If you've seen him, you've seen the Father. And so that is the reflection. What Moses permitted because of hardness of heart is not what would apply to us now. And so I hope that helps a little bit. Again, it's not a perfect answer. I'm not necessarily the Bible answer man. I'm not claiming to be the most articulate apologist in the whole world, but I hope that helps a little bit. Really good question. Let's see if we have any more. If not, we'll shut her down. Let's see. What do we got here? Will you do a video about Matthew or the New Testament didn't make up stuff and call it fulfilled prophecy? Yeah, I actually, if you go back, I mentioned the double donkey story. There's also the one on the virgin birth, where it's basically like Matthew misread a prophecy. He thought it said virgin, and it really doesn't say virgin. It just says young woman, and he took it completely out of context, and he's like, let's invent the virgin birth. Okay, so I have a response to Apologia. If you go back in the archives, I talk about that a little bit. There's also one on the Christmas story where I talk about that a little bit. And so you can check out those. Really good question, Joel. I appreciate that. I know that's a really short answer, but yeah. Let's see. Any other questions here? How do I deal with nasty doubts? Been praying about it for a long time and it's really hard. Well, Crunchy B-roll, I have a great resource for you. Go to talkaboutdoubts.com. And basically with Talk About Doubts, there are trained scholars in philosophy, science, history, New Testament, Old Testament, archaeology, all kinds of different things. It's through Jonathan McClatchy's ministry. Jonathan McClatchy is an evolutionary biologist himself, and so he knows a lot about like intelligent design and evidence from God from biology and different things like that. And so we can talk to you. I'm one of the counselors for it. There are others who are counselors, like Tim McGrew, who I mentioned earlier. Stephen Meyer is even a counselor. You might have heard of Stephen Meyer. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast recently. He's actually one of the counselors. Wesley Huff, and who I'll be publishing a video with that I interviewed, is one of the counselors. Just a lot of really good folks. So go there, fill out a form, talk to somebody one-on-one. You don't have to do this alone. You could do more than one call and just let us know what your doubts are and what the area is. Try and keep it to one area, and we can do calls on another area, and let's just help you nail it down. And so definitely get a hold of us through that way, and we'd be happy to help you. So let's see. Lego David, once again, lots of good questions. Do you believe annihilationism is supported biblically? I don't think universalism has a good biblical case for it going at all. I think annihilationism has one. If you look at like Jude 7, if you look at 2 Peter 2:7, it does talk about the wicked being destroyed rather than just like suffering eternally conscious. You do see hints of it in Paul, where Paul doesn't really talk about a whole lot of eternal conscious torment, maybe in 2 Thessalonians 1:9. But if you look at like Philippians 3:19, he talks about like people whose gods are belly will be destroyed. He constantly uses the word destroyed. And I have read Edward Fudge. I have read or listened to like people like Glenn Peoples, Chris Date on this particular argument. I think that their biblical arguments are way more solid and sound than I would have thought. My initial reaction was, well, no. Like the traditional view, that's what I've always been taught. And there's no way that anything but the traditional view could be true. I think if annihilationism is true, it's still a fearful thing to fall into the hands of God. Obviously, it's still a judgment. It's just not eternal conscious torment. Your works are brought before God, and then he you're done. You cease to exist. There may be some sort of duration of suffering, but it would be limited. To explain kind of a little bit to those who don't know what annihilationism is. So I think they make good arguments. My biggest problem with annihilationism, I guess, is that, like, historically speaking, it's just not been a position of the church. I know that they try and make arguments that there are some early church fathers that held to annihilationism or seem to have held to annihilationism, and they just really later imported their Greek philosophy, and boom, now we have the eternal conscious view like Augustine. I get really nervous anytime I hear somebody say, well, Augustine brought this into the church and therefore it's false. Like, because Augustine used to be a Manichaean and he's importing his Greek philosophy ideas. Like, people do that a lot. It's almost like what you hear with skeptics and Constantine. Constantine created the canon and all this other stuff. Those kind of arguments make me nervous. And so the biggest reason I'm not an annihilationist is because I do tend to hold to the fact that if that the church just hasn't believed it really as a whole, it's always been a minority view, and I think even church councils later even condemned it, even though I'm not like Catholic myself or Orthodox. I believe it was condemned. Somebody can feel free to let me know. That just makes me a little bit hesitant. No, church councils by themselves aren't inerrant statements or anything else like that. It just makes me hesitant. Now, I also believe in things that the church hasn't always believed for thousands and thousands of years. Personally, myself, maybe I'll get into some of those views someday, but nothing crazy, nothing heretical. Don't worry. But, so maybe that's not the strongest argument. Maybe I'm having a double standard. Just trying to be completely honest, but it makes me initially a little more hesitant. And I don't find that, like, the argument for annihilationism biblically just completely outshines the argument for traditionalism. I would say they're probably like maybe equalish. And so in that case, I'm just going to side with tradition. So hopefully that answers your question there. A little bit long-winded. Let's see if there's any more. Appreciate you guys hanging out. And this is fun. I enjoy doing these things. Let's see. Sorry for some of the awkwardness. I need like one of these special helper people that some of these other fancy streamers have. I'm just kind of control finding. What have you read about universalism? Spartan theology. Thank you. Good question. I believe you're a universalist. Hey, man, if you got stuff you want me to read, I mean, I'm willing to read something before I completely, say that it's false. I don't want to not take my own advice here on the stream. I'm trying to remember the name of the author. I have a book. Let me look it up here. Sorry for the awkward pause here. I'll have to get back with you, Ethan, on this. I can't even remember the guy's name at the moment, and I can't even remember the name of the book. But I read it. I actually tried to reread it recently. I was talking to an acquaintance of mine who's a universalist, and I have listened to a little bit of Hart, and I have listened to what's the guy's name? Gosh, I'm so sorry for the awkwardness here. I can't even remember his name. This is really bad. Anyways, awkward moment, whatever. I'll probably put it in the comments later. Really nice English guy. That's all I can remember. He used to go by a pen name, so maybe that'll help you, Ethan, in narrowing it down. I found like he was probably the one that made the best arguments because he was actually using the Bible to make his case. And I felt like some of the arguments are good, but the whole eternity can mean this, eon can mean this, and all this other stuff. I just have a really hard time. I find it to be really stretchy. And so sorry for the awkward answer. I wish all of a sudden, I'm sure I'll get off the stream and I'll be like, aha, I remember that guy's name. Robin Perry. Yes. Thank you. It is Robin Perry. Thank you so much. Robin Perry, I spent a lot of time listening to several of his lectures, a bunch of them, and I just came away not completely convinced because I don't think the way that he's arguing for the use of the word eternity works. I feel like the biggest problem that I have with universalism is it starts with philosophy and it just goes completely backwards from there. And like, I feel like you really have to cram jam a bunch of verses and ignore a bunch of other verses to get universalism out of it. That's my biggest complaint. And so thank you so much for the question. Robin Perry was the right answer. And just keeping it awkward here, you know. So Eric, you're introverted. You're socially awkward. How about doing live streams? Oh, yeah. All right. I think that might be all of the questions that we have for today. Grace. Grace has got a really good question. I'll end with Grace. What percent of atheists do you fear and respect? I don't know about a percentage. Who do I respect? I respect Cosmic Skeptic or Alex O'Connor. I think he really is somebody who's trying to do the stuff that I'm talking about here. I think he's intellectually honest. I think that he is interested in learning the truth. I don't think that he went and studied philosophy and theology and all the things that he's done because he's just doing it as some sort of stunt for his YouTube channel, as some people on Twitter have really meanly said. Like, I think that's completely inappropriate to say something like that. I think he's talking to people like Richard Swinburne. He's talking to William Lane Craig. He's talking to a lot of different people. He's really he debated my friend Jonathan McClatchy, and I know Jonathan. I know the conversations. You know that he says that Alex is really operating in good faith, and he's had good conversations with him. And so I think hopefully that Alex will someday get there. I think now this is an interesting point, Grace. One of the things when I'm talking about taking Butler's wager, and this is something that I've been a little disappointed with, is there are like really good philosophical atheists out there, like Graham Oppy, like Paul Draper. Okay. Just to name a few. Michael Hume, I think I'm not sure if he's atheist or agnostic, but I don't see a lot of them really interacting with the argument for miracles. And that's why I'm talking about the argument for miracles. I've heard Graham Oppy talk to Tim McGrew, and like his response to the argument for miracles is completely disappointing. But I think if you listen to Graham Oppy talk about, atheism versus theism, then yeah, like he's pretty good with that. I don't find his arguments convincing, but like I think there are really well-informed atheists out there. Jay Lowder is a guy I really respect, Secular Outpost. I think he's really doing his best in terms of trying to be a good interlocutor, trying to understand Christianity, knocking down straw man, atheist arguments against Christianity. He's a really good guy. The guys from Real Atheology, like Ben Watkins and the other Ben, and I think it's Justin Schreiber. I might be saying that name wrong. I really respect Joe Schmid. I know he's an agnostic, but I think these guys are incredibly intelligent, incredibly bright, really know their philosophy a billion times better than I do. But I don't see them really engaging with the argument from miracles or engaging with the text of the New Testament. And so until they do that part, I feel like they haven't really taken Butler's wager right. And this is why I don't like the classical approach. This is why I like evidentialism, because I'm going to start with like miracles and prophecy right off the gate. Because again, if Jesus rose from the dead, well, the probability of theism is one, And so yeah, good question. There are a lot of atheists that I definitely respect. There's some good ones out there. But even the ones that I respect a lot, I'd love to see them get engaged with this argument a whole lot more. So, all right. Well, I think I'm going to end on that note. Thank you guys so much for all the questions. Thank you for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. The chat has been very, very active. And so if you like these videos, like I said, please let me know. If you want me to keep doing these kind of lives, I'd love to do it. I will get back to eventually doing more of the scripted short form content. Again, I'm not doing like a lot of the responses, but if you are an atheist, I've already seen Doug out there, and you want to have a conversation, here's what I'm going to say. Let's reverse the roles. Let's do a devil's advocate kind of debate. Let's have a devil's advocate kind of conversation. If somebody is willing to do that with me on, say, the resurrection of Jesus or something like that, it doesn't have to be a formal debate. It could just be a conversation. Then let's do that. That's what I would like to do. I would like for us to push each other to make the strongest arguments for and against each other's view, and then maybe we could critique each other. And I think that would be fun. We could even, I don't know, all the money that we make from the video, if we could give to charity. Now, for me, that might not be much. So, but maybe we could raise some super chats, some kind of an awareness sort of thing, and we could find a charity that we both agree would be like a worthy cause. And so that's the kind of conversation that I would like to have. And so if this irritated you, if this rankled you, if you're an atheist YouTuber, my point was not to offend. What I'm saying is like, here's a challenge that I'm throwing out there. Let's have that devil's advocate kind of discussion, and I'll argue against the resurrection. You argue your best argument for it, and then we can critique each other, and it could be a fun thing. And let's have these conversations, because these things are way more fun. It's way more fun for me to talk to somebody and to not end up talking past somebody than to do a bunch of response videos. I find the whole response video thing, it can be helpful, it can be done well. I think Trent Horn is like one of those people who does it really well, but it's because Trent will end up having a conversation inevitably if the person is even remotely interested. And I would rather have a conversation with somebody than just talk at them and talk past them. It just saves us a lot of time. And so there you go. The challenge is out there. And again, it could just be a casual conversational kind of thing. And so on that note, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you guys enjoy the rest of your day.